My second son was actually the first one in our family to be diagnosed with autism. He was almost 5 at the time, and this is what really started my dive and journey into neurodiversity.
Raising neurodivergent kids is messy, beautiful, and a lot. I'm Mary Ellen Yates, and this is Growing Together, Neurodiversity at Home. Let's figure it out together.
Okay, let's get started. So looking back, here were some concerns in the early years for my son. Speech delay. First son, he had a speech delay. So I was pretty familiar with that. We started speech therapy. He struggled with sleep from infancy. Around 18 months, I had to start night weaning because I was so tired and I just couldn't take it anymore. Even after 2, and he's not breastfeeding anymore and he wasn't teething anymore and all that, he still had a really hard time going to sleep. He never liked being alone. He always liked to be with other people. When he first started sampling food, it seemed pretty normal, but definitely by 18 months, he was getting picky. He would mostly eat meat. There was 3 vegetables to this day: carrots, cucumbers, and bell peppers. And then he'll eat most fruit now, but he couldn't have any of his food touching. He doesn't like sauces, and definitely couldn't do casserole, soups, anything that had like mixed ingredients. He often seemed like he was in his own world, especially when he was pacing. He was usually often talking to himself and doing some kind of battle or something in his head, or talking about something, and it was really hard to get his attention. Some other sensitivities: brushing his teeth was very challenging. Giving him medication was challenging. And I was a pediatric nurse. I had a few strategies up my sleeve about how to give kids medicine, but he would not take them. My son seems to have 2 volumes, very loud and very quiet. As an infant, his cry was very loud. I think there was probably actually some hearing damage for myself. My husband described it as brain rattling. And so we were often sticking pacifiers in his mouth to get him to calm down. I remember even feeling at a time that like I wasn't bonding with him, even though I nursed him and I carried him a lot and I did like all the things to promote bonding. I still felt disconnected from him and even just kind of just frustrated. That wasn't a healthy way to feel about my own child. So I started doing a lot of positive self-talk to myself. Like, oh, well, isn't he so cute? Oh, isn't that so sweet? And eventually I noticed that how I'd interact with him was probably better because I was feeling these happy thoughts. And then I noticed that it really helped our relationship. And even to this day, he's just the sweetest kid and I love him so much. And I'm so glad I did that because he is just a wonderful kid. So let's talk about some social and play differences. A lot of times the kids that he associates with and plays with are his brother or sister's friends. So oftentimes he would do parallel play, which is common for kids up to a certain age. They'll play next to each other but not engage with each other. I remember the first time me and the parents were excited because our children were playing dinosaurs next to each other. They had done this many times before because we would get together and our kids would play. And one time they started actually interacting with each other and started playing with each other. And that was a really exciting moment to see the actual engagement. But a lot of times my son would want to be nearby because he didn't like being alone, but he didn't really want you engaging. He did like to play running games like tag with kids, but then when the game would evolve into something more detailed, he would just stop and wander off. Around 3 or 4, he started drawing a lot, and drawing has been one of his special interests, especially for things that he also has a special interest in, like dinosaurs and sharks and aggressive animals and battles and all that type of stuff. And I was also really impressed with the amount of knowledge that he had at such a young age about dinosaurs, because some of these dinosaurs he could barely pronounce, but he could tell you all about them, and it was quite impressive. I was a pediatric nurse, and I worked in a hospital, so a lot of times the kids that I saw were either profoundly autistic, or they had a lot of developmental delays, or they were just really, really sick, and so I wasn't seeing all the nuance that a lot of autistic individuals have. And it wasn't until I was talking with a friend from church and I was describing the things I was noticing with my son. And she said, to be honest, I think he has autism. By the age of almost 5, I was able to see a psychologist that was able to diagnose my son. So that's what we did in Germany. Then once we came back in the States a year and a half later, we got all the formal testing done, which also agreed with that diagnosis. So yeah, I was seeing a lot of lists of behaviors. And so I started documenting them, because when you go to a provider, my mind would go blank and I would forget all the things that I was noticing. So some things I was noticing were our battles with clothes, him having a hard time transitioning between seasons, him wearing short sleeve stuff in the wintertime and winter stuff in the summertime, and having to wear the same clothes over and over again. Also, if he were to get like a speck of water on his clothes, he had to immediately strip and change. He had some rigid routines, especially at home. So he had to have cereal and milk every morning. My husband would make a big breakfast. He did not want that. He wanted his cereal. Or if he did eat those things, he also wanted his cereal. But I noticed when we were out in public, he would just go with the flow more. But at home, he had a hard time changing that rhythm, because that's what he was used to. But in public, he was used to things being different. And also, people say that there's a lot of masking that goes on in public, but then when they're in their safe place at home, that's a lot of times when they let go of those masks and unwind from all the overload that they might have had during the day too. Some toileting experiences. He was potty trained around 3.5. So there was a couple incidences of us going on a homeschool field trip or being at a playground, and he would just drop his pants and start pooping in the middle of all these kids. So needless to say, I had to be more vigilant in public, try to get him to a bathroom. One of the big scary things was safety awareness. My older son always made sure he knew where we were in public. Then our second son came along, and he did not stay close. When he was overstimulated, we had a couple public incidents where he disappeared. One time was with friends, and he decided he needed to go to the bathroom. I looked in the female stall, and he was not there. And then when I was in the female bathroom again, I heard a noise in the male bathroom, and I went to go check. And he had locked himself in the stall and couldn't get out. But he never called out, and he never responded when I was calling his name. Another time was at a festival. He saw a blow up dinosaur and just started wandering off to it without telling anyone. And we found him on the top of the dinosaur. So those were some very scary incidents. So we started putting a GPS watch on him whenever we would go places, and we would talk to him about it. Like, this is so we keep safe, and you need to tell us when you're going places. And just teaching him about being aware and putting the watch on him whenever we were places, it helped our peace of mind. But also, he started being more aware of it too. I've noticed with my kids that they need to be explicitly taught all the things. He would also have a lot of frequent meltdowns. There was a lot of screaming. It was very overwhelming. Food tended to be a trigger. Playing with his siblings and them not doing what he wanted. Clothes, a lot of activities of daily living were often triggers for him. And personal space seemed to be an issue for him. He was very clumsy, and he had a lot of frequent injuries. And it was always his face or it was his toes. He even lost a few toenails. He was always getting injured. And I personally think there's probably a dyspraxia diagnosis in there, because there is a lot of explicitly having to teach him things, and oftentimes sequencing motor planning struggle also in there too. That's not just autism. So my son is now 7. He's still gets about 12.5 hours of therapies a week to help him with fine motor skill, gross motor skills, with speech, flexible thinking, with social interactions, and all that jazz. He has a lot of interests. His interests have been growing. So he's always liked the color gold, even since he was really little. And that has turned into his obsession with anything that's gold. And we just had a gold mining party for him for his birthday, which was fun. He's becoming quite an artist. He really enjoys drawing. He's asking for YouTube drawing videos to learn more about drawing. He's trying to use different mediums with his art too. He can tell jokes now. Before, he used to be very literal, and he's understanding sarcasm. So it's fun to see him making these connections. He is still a picky eater, but his list of safe foods has grown over time. Now at this point, I'm having him take more ownership in what he's deciding to eat, and he's making his choice for what he wants for breakfast or lunch. I ask him, what is your protein and what is your fruit or vegetable, to encourage a more well-rounded diet. His speech has improved a lot. Most people can understand him these days. There are a few letters that he's still working on. He's still in occupational therapy and physical therapy. Occupational therapy works on his attention and his fine motor skills, a lot of his activities of daily living. With physical therapy, they taught him how to ride a bike with training wheels. He is a pro at the scooter riding. He still paces and climbs, and he loves to reenact battles. He does that often, especially when he needs downtime and he needs to regulate himself, or we just come home from somewhere. He needs that time to be able to do that. And we're working on safe ways to pace, because he was climbing on the windowsills and then he was hanging off the blinds or the stick for the blinds, parking lots and stuff, and I often need to hold his hand until we're in a safe spot. These days, he's way more flexible with dishes, with clothing. He doesn't just have to wear Spider-Man these days. He has a lot of different types of graphics on his shirts. He does still have a hard time, especially in the summertime, not putting on long sleeve. Does not like to be naked. He says his skin feels itchy. So I try to encourage him to layer, because we're in Georgia, so it's hot. And I think he's become a pretty great conversationalist, but he is still better at engaging with adults than kids, but he is still social with kids. I really feel blessed to have him for a son. So his diagnosis was the doorway into understanding neurodiversity, understanding him, and eventually understanding my older son more, because later on, my older son also got an autism diagnosis. And you can stay tuned for my older son's journey and what his looked like, because it was very different. If you've noticed similar things with your child, you're not alone. Share your journey in the comments, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.